I've always believed time tells the truth. Maybe that's why I spent most of my life fixing what keeps it. Music boxes, mantle clocks, cuckoos, and brass pendulums from a world that used to care about the slow, beautiful rhythm of things. That's what I do. That's what I did. Before everything cracked. We lived just outside Boulder, Colorado, Ellie and I, in a craftsman-style house nestled between pine trees and winding roads. It was quiet, idealistic in a way, the kind of neighborhood where neighbors waved while walking their dogs and teenagers skateboarded down long, sloping drives. We had a garden, a workshop, and a son we loved more than anything. Shane was 9 when the accident happened. He'd been riding in a friend's car coming back from soccer practice when they were T-boned at an intersection by a truck that ran the light. One minute he was healthy, laughing, chasing the ball across the field. The next, he was unconscious in a hospital bed, tubes in his nose and wires across his chest. I still hear the machines beeping in my sleep. Sometimes I wake up expecting it, my ears ringing in the silence. Traumatic brain injury. That's what they called it. The doctors gave us odds, numbers, timelines, none of which made any sense to me at the time. Ellie cried. I didn't. I couldn't. I had to be the stable one, the anchor. I left the shop behind and became something else, nurse, tutor, therapist, guardian. I threw myself into it with everything I had. Days blurred. I learned how to handle seizures, how to coax words out of him with pictures, how to sit with his confusion and frustration without letting mine show. I adjusted. Ellie didn't. She started going out more, at first just errands, yoga, coffee dates. Then it was weekend hikes, longer drives, day trips with her friends. I need to clear my head, she'd say. Or, I can't help Shane if I'm falling apart too. I didn't fight her on it. How could I? Everyone processes grief differently and I was barely keeping it together myself. Still, something about this particular weekend rubbed me wrong. She told me 3 weeks in advance that she was going to spend 2 nights at a countryside cabin with her girlfriends. Said they'd rented it months ago, back before everything had gone downhill. I wasn't going to go, she said, but Savannah talked me into it. She said I need this. Savannah was her cousin, practical, earthy, the kind of person who wore flowing skirts and read tarot. She moved in with us after the accident, bringing her 2 kids and a flurry of incense and noise with her. At the time, I was grateful. Ellie needed support. Shane needed distractions. But lately, it felt like I was the one being distracted, pushed to the background in my own house. That Friday, she packed a bag and kissed Shane on the forehead while he slept. She hugged me tightly, a little too tightly, then stepped back and smiled with that practice kind of warmth. Don't worry. I'll be back Sunday night. I didn't sleep that night. After putting Shane to bed and finishing the dishes, I just sat on the couch staring at the blank TV screen. My fingers tapped against the armrest in an absent rhythm. Something wasn't sitting right. Maybe it was the way she lingered by the mirror before leaving, reapplying her lipstick twice. Or maybe it was just the distance I'd started to feel in the small, quiet moments between us, the way she'd flinch when I touched her shoulder, how she no longer asked me about my day, how she kept her phone on silent more often than not. At some point past midnight, I stood up, grabbed my keys, and left a note for Savannah in case Shane woke up early. I didn't plan on doing anything crazy, I just wanted to see for myself. Something instinctual took over, the kind of gut-deep urge you don't reason with. I drove an hour and a half through empty mountain roads, past dark fields and rustling trees, until I reached the gravel path that led to the cabin Ellie had described. I parked far enough away that no one would hear the engine. The air was cold, the kind of cold that sinks into your chest when you breathe too deeply. I walked along the tree line, careful where I stepped, until the cabin came into view. It was tucked neatly between a copse of aspens, glowing warmly through the windows like something out of a painting. But something was off. For one, I didn't hear much noise. No laughter, no voices drifting out into the night. Just soft music and the creak of wood as someone stepped onto the balcony. And then I saw her. Ellie, wrapped in a thick wool cardigan, standing under the soft yellow glow of a lantern. She wasn't alone. A man stood with her, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a navy jacket and dark jeans. She was in his arms. Not a quick hug, not one of those sidelong embraces people give when they say goodbye. This was different. Her head rested lightly against his shoulder. Her hand came up and cupped his cheek, thumb tracing a small circle near the corner of his jaw. He leaned in closer, forehead touching hers. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. They didn't kiss. But somehow that made it worse. It wasn't lust. It was familiarity. An asterisk Macy. A softness that you can't fake or explain away. I watched them stand there like that for what felt like hours but was probably less than a minute. Eventually, they turned and went back inside. The curtain fell shut behind them. I stood in the dark for a while after that. My hands were clenched in my jacket pockets, but I wasn't shivering anymore. Something inside me had gone quiet. Still, like a watch that had just stopped ticking. I drove home without turning the radio on. My headlights cut through fog as I tried to make sense of what I saw or didn't. I told myself a dozen stories. Maybe he was just a friend. Maybe she was comforting him about something tragic. Maybe I'd seen it wrong. But the truth was already blooming inside me, bitter and undeniable. I didn't bring it up until Sunday night after she returned. She came in with windblown hair and a paper bag full of organic groceries she said they'd picked up at a roadside market. She kissed Shane goodnight like everything was fine. I waited until we were alone in the kitchen. Who was the man on the balcony? I asked. Her hands froze halfway to the fridge. She didn't turn around right away. When she did, her smile was too controlled. What man? At the cabin, I said. You were holding him. Her jaw tightened. You were spying on me? That's not the part I'm asking about. She put the bag down slowly and sighed, shaking her head. He's an old friend. From my architecture firm. You don't remember Daniel? He used to visit us back when we lived near Pearl Street. No. I don't remember ever seeing you touch anyone like that. She rolled her eyes, suddenly defensive. He's going through a tough time. His wife left him. He needed support. It was just a moment, Owen. You're reading too much into it. I stayed silent. Her expression hardened. This is what I mean. You're obsessed with control. You smother everything. Do you really think I can't have a conversation with an old friend without being accused of cheating? I didn't accuse you of anything, I said. I just asked who he was. No, you followed me, she snapped. You don't trust me. That's the real issue. And frankly, I'm tired of it. I needed a weekend away to breathe, and you turned it into some twisted stakeout. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. She spun the narrative with surgical precision, redirected the blame like she'd practiced it. I was the paranoid husband, the overbearing father, the man who didn't understand boundaries. But something had snapped inside me. Quietly. Without violence or volume. Just a realization, like a bell that rings once and never fades. It echoed through me long after I'd gone back to the workshop, long after the groceries were put away and the lights turned off. The clocks in the shop didn't tick that night. I sat with them in the dark, listening to silence, to the weight of all the things she didn't say. And I knew. Whatever story she was telling, I wasn't part of it anymore. After the cabin, nothing felt the same, though I doubt anything had been right for a long time. The difference was I finally stopped pretending. I didn't confront Ellie again, not right away. She made it clear that any challenge to her version of reality would be twisted into an accusation, and any accusation would be met with outrage. She was good at flipping the script. I just started watching instead. Quietly. Intentionally. I've always had a mind for detail. It's what made me a good craftsman. I could open a music box and identify a worn pin just by the skip in the melody. I knew what gears were fractionally off by the way a pendulum lagged. That same instinct kicked in at home. Except now I was listening to her. To everything she wasn't saying. It was little things at first. Subtle, almost laughably so. Ellie started dressing differently, subtly but unmistakably. Silk blouses that weren't exactly her style. A sudden interest in scarves. Lipstick in shades I hadn't seen since our early dating days. I asked her once where she was going all dressed up. She said the co-op. Apparently, kombucha requires heels now. Then there was the phone. She used to leave it anywhere, on the kitchen counter, next to the sink, even in the bathroom. Now it was always face down or in her back pocket. Notifications were silenced. One morning, I walked past her while she was texting. She tilted the screen away so fast it looked like a reflex. I didn't say anything. Just kept walking. But that image stayed with me, her shoulders tensing, her eyes darting sideways like she'd been caught doing something shameful. Next came the laptop. She'd started working from home more after the accident, said it was easier on her to be near Shane. But she kept the laptop with her constantly, even brought it into the bathroom. It was always locked, password changed. When I asked her about it once, jokingly, she said she was working on a confidential project for her freelance clients. As if I were the competition. And then, Savannah. I used to think having Ellie's cousin in the house was a blessing. She helped with Shane, she brought an energy that cut through the grief clouding her home. But as time went on, I started to realize she wasn't a buffer, she was a distraction. Maybe even a shield. Ellie began insisting that Savannah and her kids stay indefinitely. They have nowhere else to go, she said, even though I knew for a fact Savannah's parents lived 2 towns over. It wasn't about need. It was about chaos. The noise, the mess, the constant activity, it made it impossible to have a private conversation. Or to think. I'd try to talk to Ellie after dinner and find myself interrupted by one of the cousins running through the hallway screaming about a missing sock or a broken toy. It was like being swallowed by someone else's life. She started shutting me out in other ways too. If I asked about her day, she'd give clipped answers. If I brought up something personal, she'd change the subject. Conversations became cold, transactional. Did you pay the water bill? Did Shane eat today? Don't forget Savannah needs the car tomorrow. That was the new rhythm of our marriage. Her voice stayed level, but her tone was laced with something I can only describe as contempt. I couldn't do anything right. If I forgot to pick up almond milk, I was inconsiderate. If I took too long to respond to her text while I was bathing Shane, I was passive-aggressive. I was failing her. That's what she wanted me to believe. But I wasn't the one failing. She was pushing me out emotionally, step by step. And once I started seeing it, I couldn't unsee it. I remember one night, we were lying in bed, backs to each other. I turned over to ask her something, just a simple question about a pediatrician referral. She pretended to be asleep. I knew she wasn't. Her breathing was off. Too shallow, too quick. But I let it go. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering when she had stopped choosing me. Maybe it was long before the accident. Maybe the tragedy just gave her the excuse. I started mentally tracking patterns. She always had an appointment or client call on Thursdays at 11 a.m. even though I never heard her talk to anyone. She'd run errands that took hours and came back with a single bag of groceries. Her perfume changed. The scent lingered on her coat like a stranger had touched her before she got in the car. Once, I saw a text flash across her phone while she was cooking. It read, "Can't wait to see you again." No name. Just a preview. When she noticed me looking, she closed the app so fast her thumb shook. "Work stuff," she mumbled. "Deadline." I didn't ask. That was the new rule, don't ask. Don't accuse. Just observe. And I did. But it didn't stop the ache. The worst part wasn't even the suspicion, it was the erasure. I'd come into the kitchen and she wouldn't look up. I'd make a joke and she'd pretend not to hear it. I started to feel like a ghost in my own home. Like I was haunting a version of my life that had already moved on without me. Shane noticed too, in his own way. He'd cling to me more, cry when she left the room. Sometimes he'd look at her with this vacant confusion, like he wasn't sure if she was still the same mom. I tried to shield him from it all. But kids feel things. They always do. I remember fixing a broken ballerina box in the garage one afternoon. The kind with the spinning dancer and the twinkling melody. It belonged to some woman who had inherited it from her grandmother. The whole thing was warped from water damage, the mechanism rusted through. I opened it up, examined the inside, and found the spring had snapped, twisted in on itself until it couldn't hold tension anymore. It just sat there, lifeless. I held the piece in my palm and stared at it for a long time, realizing it felt familiar. Like I knew exactly what it was to be a part of something that used to sing and now just sat silent. Later that night, Ellie came in from a walk. Her cheeks were flushed, lips slightly parted. She had that dazed look like someone had just kissed her and her mind hadn't caught up yet. I pretended not to notice. She went straight to the shower. I listened to the water run while I sat with Shane on the couch watching cartoons we'd already seen a dozen times. And I thought, I'm losing her. But not in the way people usually mean. I wasn't losing her to grief or depression or confusion. I was losing her to someone else. Someone who made her laugh. Someone who gave her that look I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Someone she could talk to without folding her arms or raising her voice. I didn't know who it was yet, but I knew he existed. He was real. He was out there. The scariest part? I think she wanted me to know. Not in an obvious blow-up-the-marriage kind of way, but in a slow, strategic unraveling. A dismantling of the life we'd built, brick by brick. So that when it all came down, she could point at the mess and say, "See? It was already falling apart." She wanted an exit and I was the excuse. I just wasn't ready to give it to her. Not yet. Some people say the truth has a way of surfacing on its own, like it's water rising through the cracks. I don't believe that. I think the truth has to be hunted, dug out, unearthed with blood and fingernails if necessary. If I'd kept waiting, I would have drowned in half-truths and polished lies. It started with a postcard, a small, almost meaningless thing. At first, I thought it was one of those generic thinking of you cards people send without substance. But it wasn't. It came in the mail on a Tuesday afternoon while Ellie was out with Savannah, supposedly helping her with errands. I brought the mail inside and sifted through it absent-mindedly until I saw it. An antique-style postcard of a mountain lake I didn't recognize, with handwriting that stopped me cold. It wasn't Ellie's. The note was short. Just one sentence. Counting the days until next time. Same place, same magic. No signature. No return address. I turned it over again and again. I memorized the loops in the handwriting, the way the T's weren't crossed. It wasn't playful. It wasn't vague. It was int asterisk mate. 2 int asterisk mate for a coworker or friend. And it wasn't written to Savannah. The only person it made sense to be for was Ellie. She'd carelessly brought it in and left it on the side table, maybe not even realizing it had arrived. Maybe assuming I wouldn't notice. But I noticed. Kept it. Slid it between the pages of an old repair manual in the garage. That night, while Ellie curled up on the couch and fake laughed at some show, I sat beside her with my hands folded tightly in my lap. I didn't ask. I didn't accuse. I just watched her smile at her phone and pretend everything was fine. The next morning, I made a call. A friend of mine from high school, Eddie, had once hired a private investigator when his wife was sneaking around with her golf coach. I asked for the contact. The guy's name was Neil Gallagher. Older, plain-looking, eyes like someone who'd seen enough to stop reacting. We met in the back room of a small cafe 30 miles out of town, where no one knew me. I told him I didn't want scandal. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted to know what was real and what wasn't anymore. He didn't ask many questions. Just took the postcard, scribbled a few notes, and promised to be discreet. The hardest part was pretending nothing had changed. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a lie inside a lie. Ellie would leave for appointments and quick meetups, and I'd nod like a man who believed her. She became bolder or maybe just more careless. Sometimes she'd come home late, flush-faced and smelling faintly of cologne that didn't belong to either of us. She'd give excuses about Savannah's car breaking down or a friend going through a crisis. I acted understanding, supportive. She kissed me on the cheek once and said, "You've been so calm lately. It's nice." I smiled and nodded, but inside, I was unraveling. Then, on a Thursday morning, Neil called. "I've got something for you," he said. "Do you want it in person?" "Yes," I said. Too fast. "Today." We met in the same cafe. He slid a manila envelope across the table. No build-up, no ceremony. "I didn't include everything," he said. "Just what you need to see. You want more? I've got it." I nodded, opened the flap with trembling fingers, and pulled out a series of printed photographs. Ellie, at the same countryside cabin I'd seen her at that night. Different weekend, different clothes, same man. They were walking out of a store together, laughing. One photo caught her brushing his arm with her fingertips. In another, they were in a car parked off a dirt road, his hand on her thigh, hers on his wrist. Later, there was sh*t of them walking out of a spa resort, her hair still damp, both of them in fresh clothes and holding takeaway coffees. They weren't snapsh*ts of a mistake. They were a portfolio of routine, familiarity, connection. I flipped through the pages slowly, letting each one drive a nail deeper. When I got to the last photo, Ellie leaning into his chest while he kissed the top of her head, I couldn't breathe. I closed the envelope and sat back. "Who is he?" I asked. "Daniel L. Rhodes, former senior designer at Altair Architecture. Married once, divorced 6 years ago. Lives in Fort Collins. They worked together for 3 years. So it was Daniel. The one she'd insisted was just a friend." Neil sipped his coffee like we were talking about the weather. "You want background on him too?" "No," I said. "This is enough. More than enough." I drove home like a man watching his life dissolve in the rearview mirror. When I got there, Ellie was in the backyard with Savannah and the kids, grilling burgers and laughing like she hadn't just detonated everything. I stood at the window and watched her flip a patty, sip her beer, touch Savannah's shoulder like a woman completely unburdened. She wasn't worried. She thought I'd bought the act. And for weeks I had. But not anymore. That night I sat alone in my workshop. I spread the photos across my workbench like puzzle pieces. In the corner sat a half-disassembled clock from 1874, Its inner workings paused mid-repair. It looked more intact than my life did. I stared at Ellie's smiling face in the photos. She looked happy, lighter. She hadn't looked like that around me in years. And for the first time, I didn't feel just hurt. I felt clarity. It wasn't a one-time slip, not a kiss caught in a moment of weakness. It was sustained, deliberate. She had built another world where I didn't exist. A world that made her feel something she didn't get from the life we shared. And maybe, if she told me she was unhappy, really told me, I could have fought for her. But she didn't. Instead, she chose to lie. Day after day. She watched me tend to our son, drown in guilt, trade my identity for survival. And still, she slipped away to someone else's arms. And came home like nothing happened. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even feel anger. Not yet. What I felt was finality. A sense that the story had already been written. The question now wasn't what happened. It was what now. Ellie came into the workshop later that evening, holding a cup of tea in both hands like a peace offering. She leaned in the doorway, smiling softly. "You coming to bed soon?" she asked. I turned over one of the photos on the workbench, hiding it under a pile of gears. "Soon," I said. "Just finishing up something." She nodded. "Okay. Don't stay up too late." I didn't answer. She didn't wait. After she left, I sat with the tea she made. Didn't drink it. Just held it until it cooled. Until the truth stopped burning in my hands and settled into my bones like a quiet war. I stayed there until dawn, staring at the old clock and the betrayal laid bare beside it. And when morning came, I knew. She wasn't going to confess. And I wasn't going to beg. Some men explode when they find out. Shout. Throw things. Make a scene so big the neighbors remember it for years. I didn't. That was never my way. When I saw the truth, when I laid those photos out under the dim light of my workshop, I didn't feel rage. I felt a strange calm, like something had finished dying and all that was left was cleanup. I didn't sleep that night. I walked the house instead, room by room, floorboard by floorboard. It felt like I was saying goodbye to a place that didn't know I was leaving. I passed by the living room where we used to read to Shane at night, now mostly filled with Savannah's kids sprawled across the rug. I lingered in the kitchen, where Ellie once danced barefoot while I made coffee. I stood at the foot of the stairs, staring up at our bedroom, knowing she was in there asleep, breathing the same air under the same roof but miles away from me. It hit me in waves. I didn't know this woman anymore. I didn't even know if I ever had. I knew her habits, sure, how she liked her eggs, how she bit her nails when she was nervous, how she hummed when she cleaned. But her soul? The parts of her that made promises and meant them? That version of her was gone. Maybe she never existed outside of my own projection. The next morning, I got up before everyone else and took a drive. I ended up in Montana. It wasn't planned. I just pointed the car northwest and let the road take Maine. Somewhere outside of Billings, I pulled into a little town I'd never heard of. It had a population sign that read 1109, a single stoplight, and a main street that hadn't been updated since the 70s. I got a cup of coffee at a diner where the waitress called me Han and poured refills without asking. The kind of place where no one looked at you too long, but everyone nodded like you belonged just by walking in the door. That's where the idea hit me. Not like lightning, more like a gentle tap on the shoulder. What if I didn't go back? Not right away. Not with yelling or confrontation or lawyers. What if I just disappeared? I didn't want revenge. I didn't want a scene. I wanted distance. Quiet. I wanted the space to rebuild what she'd spent months dismantling in silence. So I started planning. Quietly. I opened a new bank account at a small credit union, under my full name, Owen Thomas Lawson. No aliases. No tricks. I wasn't running from the law. I just didn't want to be found. I used a P.O. box at a UPS store 2 towns over for mail. I signed up for a new phone plan, prepaid, anonymous, and set up a forwarding service for a few essential documents. I found a workshop for rent on the edge of town. A broken-down garage that used to be a lawnmower repair shop. The windows were dusty, the roof sagged a little, but the bones were good. I talked to the owner. An older guy named Dean who didn't ask too many questions. Told him I fixed antique clocks and music boxes. He nodded like it made perfect sense. I paid the deposit in cash. That became my home base. Every other weekend, I'd return to Boulder, drive back into the neighborhood like nothing had changed. I made sure I was never gone long enough to raise suspicion. Ellie assumed I was going on parts runs or doing side work. She barely noticed. Savannah didn't ask. I started slowly moving tools out of the garage at night, one box at a time, packed into the back of my car beneath blankets. She never saw. She was too busy texting Daniel or whatever name she saved him under in her phone. Then came the hard part, preparing Shane. I couldn't take him with me. Not yet. Not legally. Not safely. But I could set things in motion. I started writing him letters. Simple, clear, full of love. I didn't mail them. I stored them. Dozens of them. Letters he'd one day find, or that I'd deliver myself when the time was right. I left breadcrumbs. A photo of us tucked in his memory box. A wooden puzzle I carved with his name etched into the back. I wanted him to remember that I was there, that I never stopped loving him, that I wasn't leaving him, just the wreckage around us. And then, one Friday morning when the house was empty, Savannah gone, the kids at school, Ellie at yoga, I packed a single bag, just one. Jeans, shirts, my pocket watch, a photograph of Shane as a baby, and my father's old leather-bound journal. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen table. Next to it, I placed a folded piece of paper. It read, "I know, I've known. I won't fight you, but I won't stay either. Oh, that's all. No threats, no begging, just the truth." I turned off my phone, removed the SIM card, dropped it into the garbage disposal and turned it on. The sound was metallic, final. I deleted my social media accounts, wiped my email, and cleared every trace I could. And then, I walked out the front door. No one stopped me. No one chased me. The air felt different, thinner, lighter, like I'd peeled off a skin that didn't fit anymore. The drive back to Montana felt like driving through the layers of someone else's dream. Towns blurred. Landscapes changed. By the time I crossed the state line, I wasn't Owen the husband, or Owen the caregiver, or Owen the ghost haunting his own house. I was just Owen. The house I rented was small. 2 rooms. No internet. A wood-burning stove and a leaky faucet. But it was mine. I put the ring in a drawer. I hung Shane's photo on the wall. I opened my toolbox and laid out the parts I'd brought like sacred relics. Then I started working again. For real. Clock hands, music box springs, delicate chimes that hadn't sung in decades. I brought them back to life. One by one. Locals trickled in slowly. A farmer with a broken metronome. A teacher whose great-grandmother's cuckoo clock hadn't worked since the Reagan era. They didn't ask questions. Just watched as I fixed things. They started calling me the clock guy, and I started sleeping again. Some nights, I'd walk down to the lake just past the edge of town, sit on a rock, watch the sky, think about Shane, wonder if he'd remember me clearly, wonder if Ellie had read the note, if she'd cried, if she was relieved. I never wondered about Daniel. He didn't matter. He was just the symbol of what she wanted that I wasn't, or refused to become. One evening, while closing up the shop, I found an old note in the pocket of a coat I hadn't worn in months. Ellie's handwriting, from before the accident. It said, "Whatever happens, we'll face it together. Always, E." I stared at it for a long time, not with anger, not even grief, just distance. The kind that can't be crossed anymore. The kind you choose to leave behind. I folded the note, placed it in a drawer beside my father's journal, and turned off the light. I didn't vanish to run away. I vanished to survive. You don't realize how much of your identity is made up of other people until you remove yourself from all of them. When I left Boulder, I thought I was just walking away from a marriage. But it was more than that. I wasn't just shedding Ellie. I was stepping out of the version of myself that existed only through her eyes. The caregiver, the husband, the problem, the background noise. In Montana, no one knew who I'd been. And I didn't volunteer the story. They called me Owen, just Owen. The guy who fixed time. I registered the shop under a generic name. Lawson Timepieces. No flash. No website. Just a wooden sign, carved by hand, that hung above the door and creaked whenever the wind got bold. People liked that. The honesty of it. The simplicity. Word traveled fast in a town this small. Folks started showing up with old heirlooms, broken carriage clocks, dusty metronomes, wind-up toys that hadn't played music in decades. They'd place them on the counter like offerings and say, "It belonged to my grandfather," or "This was my mom's favorite thing." I treated each piece with reverence. Cleaned every cog and spring like it was sacred. It wasn't about the mechanics. It was about giving someone their memory back. And in doing that for them, I started recovering pieces of myself. I stopped checking the time obsessively. I no longer waited for a text or braced for an apology that would never come. The silence that used to feel suffocating became comforting. My days became rituals: coffee at 6:45, workshop opened by 7:30, closed at 4 o'clock sharp. In the evenings, I'd read or take long walks through the woods at the edge of town. I started cooking again, real food, not just microwave meals and sandwiches. There was an old hound that hung around the shop. No collar. No owner anyone could identify. Locals called him Jasper. He'd show up around noon, curl up under the porch, and stay until sunset. We kept each other company. He never asked questions. Neither did most people here. But sometimes late at night, I'd sit by the stove and wonder about Shane. Not with pain, just longing. I imagined him taller now, maybe stronger. I pictured his smile, the way his head tilted when he was trying to understand something. I missed his laugh. God, I missed that sound more than anything. I wrote him letters. Real ones. No more hypothetical drafts shoved into drawers. I bought cream-colored stationery and wrote slowly, deliberately. I told him about the shop, about Jasper, about the woman who brought me a broken carousel horse music box and cried when I fixed it. I never mentioned Ellie. I didn't want to shape his memory of her. Every few weeks, I mailed a new letter to a P.O. box I'd rented back in Colorado, one I addressed to Shane himself. I didn't know if he ever saw them. I didn't expect a reply. But it felt like I was still reaching for him. Still keeping that thread alive. About 4 months in, I got one back. No return address. Just a small white envelope tucked into my own post office box. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper with uneven handwriting. Dad, I got your letters. I like the stories. The clock from the carousel sounds cool. Mom says you're away for work. I don't believe her. I miss you. Shane. I read it 3 times, then again with my hands shaking. It was the first piece of home I'd touched since I left. I pinned it behind the counter in the shop, tucked just behind the cash register where only I could see it. That single note did more for me than therapy ever could have. It told me he hadn't forgotten. That he still saw me somewhere in the fog. That was enough to keep going. Not long after that, people in town started opening up more. I'd be invited to potlucks, asked to speak at the middle school's career day, even got roped into helping fix a church bell that hadn't rung in 20 years. I never became loud or social, but I was no longer invisible. Teenagers would wander into the shop after school, curious about the gears and tools. One of them, a lanky kid named Theo, asked if I'd teach him how to fix things. Not for money, he said. Just, I think it's cool. So I did. On Wednesdays and Saturdays, he'd come by and we'd work on small repairs. I gave him simple tasks, oiling gears, polishing brass, but he picked it up quick. Sometimes I'd catch him just watching, absorbing. It reminded me of how I used to sit beside my dad in his garage, fascinated by the sound of a winding key clicking into place. Life became a kind of steady hum. Not joy, not yet, but peace. I stopped flinching when the phone rang. I no longer jumped at the sound of a car door outside. Ellie didn't know where I was, and I didn't intend to make it easy for her. Until she did. It happened on a Thursday just before closing. The wind had picked up, rattling the doorframe. I was finishing a repair on a 1912 French mantel clock when a tall man in a navy suit stepped through the door. He didn't say his name, but I knew right away. "Mr. Lawson?" he asked. "I represent someone who's been looking for you." I said nothing. "She just wants to talk," he added, watching me carefully. "Did she send you to guilt me? To drag me back?" "No," he said, "just to find out if you're alive." "Now she knows," I replied and pointed at the door. He left without argument. 3 days later, she came. I knew the sound of her car before I saw it. Something in my body just recognized it. She stepped out onto the gravel in a gray coat, hair tied back, face thinner than I remembered. Her eyes searched the front of the shop before settling on me through the window. She didn't smile. Neither did I. When she walked in, the bell over the door sounded like AG*NSH*T. Owen, she said, voice soft. I nodded. Ellie. There was a long silence between us. The kind that fills the room like smoke. I didn't expect to find you here, she said. I didn't expect you to look. She stepped closer, but not too close. I don't want to make a scene. Then don't. She took a breath. I read your note. At first, I thought you were bluffing. Then I realized you were never the dramatic one. No, I said. Just the invisible one. Her face fell. She nodded like she deserved that. Maybe she did. I made mistakes, she said. I don't have a list of excuses. But I came here because I wanted to tell you I'm sorry. Not because I expect anything. Just because you deserve that much. I studied her for a long time. She looked older. Or maybe just undone. Why now? I asked. Because Shane asks about you every night. And I can't lie to him anymore. That hurt. But it also meant he still asked. I'm not coming back, I said. She nodded. I didn't come to ask you to. We stood there like that, two people staring across a bridge that had already burned. I'll leave you be, she said. I needed to see you once. I didn't stop her as she turned and walked out. Didn't follow. Didn't speak. When the door closed behind her, the silence returned. But it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. That night, I wrote Shane a new letter. I told him I saw his mom. That she looked tired. That she missed him. That I wasn't far. That I was okay. I told him the truth. And then I tucked the letter into an envelope and walked it down to the mailbox under the stars with the sound of the woods breathing around me. I didn't need a mirror to know who I was anymore. I wasn't broken. I was becoming whole.